The Dreamcast! It's remembered as one of the greatest consoles ever to release. I myself have fond memories of the console. Until this day, it is one of my favorite platforms. But what about its successful launch? The triumphant return of Sega, its amazing library, and of course, the reason behind its eventual demise. So let's pop those rose-tinted glasses off, examine the details, and take an unbiased look at the Sega Dreamcast, and see why it was the last console Sega would ever release after entering the console business in 1983, 18 years early. Over the past 4 weeks, we've looked at the history, launch, reception, and the eventual fall of the Dreamcast. The console enjoyed some impressive highs, and for a time it seemed like Sega was back, but due mostly to past transgressions and steep competition, Sega prematurely bowed out of the console business on March 31st, 2001. That being said, even though the Dreamcast ended over 20 years ago now, a whole new generation is starting to come around to this interesting little white box they've heard so much about. There's really only one more thing to talk about before closing this thing out. And that is, of course, the reason you buy a console to begin with. I bet you thought I forgot. The games. There were over 600 officially released games across all regions in the Dreamcast catalog. And while like any console, it had its stinkers, it did in fact have a large amount of great, if not all successful games. While I won't go through them all, some of the more popular highlights would be Sonic Adventure, the mascot's first and best, according to many, 3D adventure and best-selling Dreamcast game at 2.5 million units. While like many Dreamcast games, its controls are a bit archaic at times by today's standards, Sonic's first jaunt into 3D was a great semi-open world romp with set pieces that stunned in 1999 and still do today. Sonic Adventure 2. Many consider this late in the console's life release to be the quintessential 3D Sonic game, taking all that was right from the first game and elaborating on it and fixing its shortcomings. While I do think the game is great, I still prefer the first game overall, warts and all. But Sonic Adventure 2 is still a fantastic way to experience the blue blur in 3 dimensions. Soul Calibur. As far as launch titles go, Soul Calibur has to be one of the greatest, up there with the likes of Mario 64, Halo, Call of Duty 2, and Breath of the Wild. Yes, a fighting game stands up with all those iconic titles. The tight controls, wonderful gameplay, and fantastic graphics that still stand up today were enough, but add to that the extremely, that's extreme with an X, it was the 90s after all, addictive campaign mode that even non-fighting game fans can get into, and what you've got is one of the best fighting games and launch games ever made. Grandia 2. The Dreamcast library of RPGs may not have been as big as its competitors, but what it did have were pretty phenomenal. Grandia 2 was the RPG that got me into JRPGs, and yes, I had been playing video games for around 15 years at that point. But RPGs, most of which were of the J variety at the time, just weren't my thing. Grandia 2 changed all that though. Overall, the game is fairly standard JRPG fare, but the presentation and always fun battle mechanics are fantastic. Some of the magic spells and their visual representation in this game are insane. You can drop the moon on your opponent at one point. The fucking moon! The game was a blast from beginning to end, and I recommend it to any JRPG fan, and even those of you out there that may have always wondered what all the fuss was about the genre. Skies of Arcadia. When it comes to great RPGs, Skies of Arcadia has to be a part of the conversation. I would even go as far as to say that this is the best JRPG ever made, in my opinion. Come at me, Final Fantasy VII fans. It's standard JRPG fare, but holy shit, it's never been done better than it has been here. The world, the characters, the story, the gameplay, the look, everything here is done so damn well. If there's ever been a game that deserved a sequel that seems like it just won't happen, it's Skies of Arcadia. It's downright criminal that we only have one of these games. Of all the great games on the system, Skies of Arcadia is my favorite overall by a healthy margin. If you haven't played this game, go play it now. There was a port on the GameCube that added a minuscule amount of content and doesn't have as good a sound that is a bit easier to acquire, but even that one commands a hefty price tag today. And for some reason, this game has never been ported over to any other platform. If there's one game worth seeking out, it's Skies of Arcadia. Yes, it's that good. Resident Evil. Code Veronica. The Dreamcast received solid ports of Resident Evil 2 and 3 Nemesis, but the RE crown jewel was the, at the time, exclusive Resident Evil Code Veronica. Code Veronica was originally conceived as the third entry in the series, but after the success of the second game, Capcom decided to make Nemesis, a somewhat companion piece to Part 2, the official third game. Code Veronica is the first to have 3D backgrounds, a camera that follows the character, and a huge update to the graphics engine. After the lukewarm reception of Nemesis, Code Veronica was a fantastic return to the series' roots, while at the same time moving the series forward. For RE fans, this is one of the best RE games around and has been woefully overlooked for the recent remake treatment that the first 3 games, and the forthcoming, at the time of this recording, 4th game, have received. Fortunately, the game has been ported to multiple platforms now, so it's more readily available than some of the other games on this list. Crazy Taxi 1 and 2, spot-on ports of the simple yet addictive arcade hit. There's not much substance here, but man, there's a ton of fun to be had, and the sequel adds a few extra fun modes to extend its lifespan. The NFL 2K series. The first real competitor to the juggernaut that is Madden NFL, the NFL 2K series was thought by many to be the superior sports ball game. While the genre was never really my thing, I can appreciate the fantastic graphics and realism that are on display here. The series even offered online multiplayer with 2K1 before Madden. The series ran strong on other platforms for years after the Dreamcast's demise, even with EA purchasing the exclusive rights to the NFL brand in video games for a period of years. Like I said, it's not my cup of tea, but if you're a sports game fan, this series is probably for you. The NBA 2K series. Much like its NFL counterpart, the NBA 2K series was lauded as a landmark in the genre. The series was seen as the superior option by many and is running strong till this day, topping charts each year. House of the Dead 2, an arcade-perfect port of the highly successful Sega arcade game House of the Dead 2, is a great light gun shooter. The only real issue with the game isn't really with the game itself, but with the decision Sega made to not release its official light gun peripheral in the US due to recent gun violence in the country. There were third-party options such as Mad Catz, but these weren't of the highest quality. The game is playable with a controller, but come on, who the hell wants to do that? The official Japanese light gun can be imported and does work with the US Dreamcast system, but unfortunately it is locked out of working with the US release of House of the Dead 2. So if you're interested in playing this one, I would suggest importing a Japanese copy and the light gun. As with other light gun games, you'll need a CRT for it to work though. Virtua Tennis. While I've never been much of a sports game fan, Virtua Tennis is one of those games that transcends its genre a bit. Kind of like the fantastic Fight Night Round 3 on the Xbox 360. Am I a tennis fan? No. Is this a tennis game? Yes. Do I love it? Yes, absolutely. Virtua Tennis is just such a well-made, fun, and accessible game that you can't help but have fun with it. Granted, half the time I don't know how I'm doing score-wise, but I do know that I'm having a hell of a good time either way, and apparently spreading a whole lot of love. Shenmue. As one of the most well-known games to come out of the system, Shenmue earns its legacy. It's a hard game to categorize. It has adventure mechanics, but it's not an adventure game. It has simulation mechanics, but it's not a simulation game. It has open world mechanics, but I wouldn't classify it as a traditional open world game either. Then what the hell is it? I don't know. But it is an experience. Ultimately, it's a cinematic experience where your character, Ryu, goes on a revenge quest to find his father's killer. It's not your traditional telling either, really delving into the day-to-day details of such an affair. The game has its issues, but it's such a unique experience with some truly groundbreaking, at the time, elements to it you can't help but be entertained. We're talking about a game that forces you to get a job in order to progress the story. And not just get a job, but actually perform said job for weeks. You may not love every minute of it, but you will remember it. Metropolis Street Racer. This interesting little racer was known for having fantastic vehicle models and a unique point system that ran through every aspect of the game. The Kudos system. Developed by a newer little UK studio, you earn these points for everything you do in the game, especially being stylish. The game was less about winning and more about how you win, and was a unique twist on the tried and true racing genre. If all this sounds a bit familiar, that's because that little studio was Bizarre Creations, and this was the forebear to the popular Project Gotham racing gaming series on Microsoft's Xbox platform some years later. While not quite as refined as those later games, MSR is still a uniquely fun ride. Echo the Dolphin. Another first-time jump into the third dimension, Echo the Dolphin hadn't been seen since the Sega CD. The jump to 3D gave us a huge, beautiful world to explore as the titular dolphin. And when I say beautiful, I mean beautiful. This was one of the best-looking games around at the time, and while dated now, it still stands up pretty good. The story's in line with what we had come to expect from an Echo game, so if that's not your thing, this one's not gonna change your mind. This was an extremely relaxing game to play at times, though that zen could be disrupted by the finicky controls that were serviceable but not the best. Virtua Fighter 3TB. I never loved Virtua Fighter. That being said, I never hated it either. I was very middle of the road with the series. I realize that a lot of people do enjoy the series though, and I will say that 3TB is the most fun I've had with it, and it's never looked better. The game was also a big seller in Japan, and it is loved by many. Dead or Alive 2. The DOA series was kind of like the trashy cousin of the more sophisticated Virtua Fighter. She's pretty shallow and doesn't have as much depth, but she is fun, and oh man, trashy or not, she's a looker. Like in that Kesha kind of way. She's trashy as hell, probably pretty dirty, and you don't want to admit it to anybody, but she is exotically hot. It doesn't hurt that the gameplay is pretty fun too, and boob jiggle. Never underestimate the boob jiggle. Power Stone 1 and 2. A solid Smash Brothers-like Capcom game with fast-paced 4-player action and fun gameplay. Is it going to replace Smash Brothers? No, but its less cutesy approach is a welcome distraction with tons of fun and 4 players on the same couch. Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It's exactly what it's selling, an arcade-perfect port of the arcade Capcom fighter hit MVC2. If you enjoyed the arcade game, you'll love this. Spider-Man. This was a multi-platform game that didn't really add anything new to the Dreamcast version, but this was the best running and looking version of the game available. It may not hold a candle to something like Spider-Man 2018 in the gameplay department, it is however a great representation of these characters and a fun solid webhead adventure, especially for the time. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. I hadn't played the original Legacy of Kain when I was introduced to Soul Reaver, and thankfully you don't have to get into this one. This is a fantastic Metroidvania 3D adventure game with awesome gameplay, an engaging story, and a creative world that keeps everything fresh throughout its long runtime. There's a reason that you still hear people talk so fondly about this game 20 years later, even though there's been sequels. The sequels were good, but Soul Reaver was awesome. Daytona, USA. This one shouldn't need any introduction to anyone who's ever stepped foot in an arcade. Hearing that iconic Rolling Stone and the Daytona theme will transport you right back to those smoke-filled, dimly lit bastions of fun, and better yet, this is the best version of the game, even outshining the arcade original in the graphics and features department. It's Daytona USA. It's fast, loud, over-the-top arcadey fun. What more do you need to know? Choo Choo Rocket. This is a quirky little puzzle game that is highly addictive and perfectly encapsulates that just one more level style of gameplay. This game tasks you with using a limited amount of directional tiles to get all of your mice to the escape rocket without running into a cat. It's fairly simple and great fun, but its true claim to fame is that it was the first official online console game allowing up to 4 players to try and collect the most mice in a frantic race to their rockets. Phantasy Star Online. The Dreamcast was a host to a lot of firsts, and PSO was one of those, being the first online console RPG. A grind-happy dungeon crawler at its heart, this was the first online game and online RPG that I ever played extensively. There's a story here, but it's fairly shallow. PSO is all about the grind and working as a team. Its addictive, deep gameplay saw me sink hours upon hours of my early 20s into this game, forming some online friendships that spanned multiple consoles and lasting for years to come. The Dreamcast was also home to some truly different, innovative, and just outright strange games. While there are many, here's a few of my top picks of some truly odd titles that are worth checking out. Starting with a game that's as well known for its odd, if not questionable, title as it is its truly strange gameplay. And of course, I'm talking about Seaman. Go ahead, get it out of your system. Done? Alright, good. Let's move on.
Seaman is a virtual pet simulator where you meticulously raise a strange half-man, half-fish frog creature. If that's not odd enough, the game came packaged with a microphone that you plugged into the controllers so that you could talk to your Seaman, and it would talk back to you. Yeah, it's a game where the main gameplay element is that you hold conversations with a mutant man-frog. Oh yeah, and Mr. Seaman, he's not so nice. The majority of your interactions with the creature consists of him talking shit and deprecating you. The voice recognition and responses are actually pretty varied and well done. This is an odd experience, but it is an experience that is guaranteed to be unique. Leonard Nimoy is the narrator also, so there's that. Jet Set Radio! Jet Set Radio, or Jet Grind Radio in the US,
Because all that setting was just too much for the youths over here.
is a semi-open world graffiti tagging game. Does it sound too interesting? Well, let's add skates to the mix. But not just skates, but skates with jets on them, and a hyper-stylized future setting of Neo Tokyo, because that just sounds cool. And honestly, it is. That's what this game is. It's just cool. The fun grinding and tagging mechanics while you run or skate from the police, mixed with the super cool stylized cel-shaded graphics and the absolutely awesome neopunk soundtrack, make JSR an absolute blast. And while other tagging games have come since, nothing has been able to match JSR's mix of attitude, fun, and pure coolness. Space Channel 5. Do you like Parappa the Rapper? Do you wish it had more aliens, less rap, and more pop? A bit more pre-adolescent sexiness? Well, Space Channel 5 and its Japanese-only sequel have got you covered. Space Channel 5 is a very Japanese rhythm game, nothing more, nothing less. A lot of your enjoyment, or tolerance, of it will be based on your appreciation, or lack thereof, of the music, which is an interesting mix of modern pop with a heavy 1960s twang. It does have a James Bond super cool vibe coursing through it, and never takes itself serious in the slightest.
It's about as shallow as your average TikTok video, and you're probably not going to get too much mileage out of it.
But what you do get will be a memorable, interesting good time. Typing of the Dead. It's House of the Dead, but with a keyboard. Typing of the Dead has got to be one of the most fun forms of edutainment available. You have to type a variety of words and phrases to shoot the zombies, and some of those phrases are pretty out there. The House of the Dead series has always been kinda quirky, but this is definitely the quirkiest thing the series has ever done. But it's actually really fun, and you really can learn a valuable skill in the process.
One that till this day, I still suck at.
Playing the game on original hardware today could get pricey given the price of the Dreamcast keyboard, game, and the console, but it has been ported over to other platforms such as PC that make it a bit more accessible now. The sequel, Typing of the Dead Overkill, is available on Steam and is an absolute insane blast. Samba de Amigo. Before there was Guitar Hero, there was Samba de Amigo. Pretty much the same idea, but with maracas and a hint of dancing. The game features a more South American vibe than its contemporaries, and the music is made up mostly of remixed versions of popular Latin music such as Ricky Martin.
Don't judge, he was big at the time.
It's a fun, energetic game that will get you off your ass with some catchy tunes. The required maraca controllers were, and still are, a bit pricey, making the barrier to entry a bit high. There is, however, a port on the Wii that doesn't require them that is still fun, but using the real maracas controllers and dance mat to play this game is an experience that can't quite be matched. And it's always fun to watch people flail around like idiots while playing these types of games. Sword of the Berserk, Guts Rage, or as it's known in Japan,
Berserk, Millennium Falcon Arc, Chapters of the Flowers of Oblivion.
Probably the most perplexing epic name of anything is a heavy story-based hack-and-slash adventure game based on the popular Japanese manga Berserk. Thankfully, you don't have to have any previous knowledge of the manga to understand what's going on here, and this one's a hell of a fun ride. The gameplay is solid, the graphics are nice, the violence is high, and the story is deeper than you expect and pretty involved. I'd love to see a sequel to this great game that's stuck with me over the years, but given it's been over 20 years and virtually nobody on this side of the pond talks or even knows about it, I doubt that will ever happen. Still, definitely worth checking out though. SegaGaGa, or SGGG, I call it SGGG, is quite possibly the weirdest game on this list, and this is a list that has Typing of the Dead and Seaman on it. It's the only game on this list that was never released in North America and is described as a Sega simulation. It's a JRPG where you play as a kid off the street in a future Tokyo who gets hired at Sega in their new SegaGaGa department to help save the struggling company from losing to its rival, the suspiciously Sony-like Dogma, who owns 97% of the console market. Sound familiar? Gameplay involves battling employees and other characters throughout various Sega development studios, some being taken from older game franchises like Sonic, Golden Axe, and more. It features many tongue-in-cheek references to Sega and the video game industry, particularly Sony and the PS2. The parallels to real life and the sheer batshit insanity in this game are an absolute blast. It almost comes across as a swan song love letter to Sega fans. Sega knew they were on the way out, so they made a game about it. The game has been all but impossible to play if you don't speak Japanese for years due to it being so text heavy. But a recent AI translator feature addition to RetroArch has finally made it possible for we English speakers to experience this insanely out there piece of history.
The Dreamcast library is varied to say the least, and while I would suggest any of the games on this list, there's so many more great games on the platform that still stand up till today, just waiting to be discovered by a new generation.
In retrospect, the Dreamcast has been regarded as one of the greatest consoles of all time that continued Sega's history of releasing very interesting, if not always successful, games that some declare as ahead of their time. I, like many, look back at the Dreamcast as an awesome, forward-thinking, revolutionary console. It feels as if its life was cut short because it was. Before the console could fail, Sega pulled out, leaving everyone who purchased the console to feel like there was so much more mileage left in it.
While I do believe the console was great, one of the reasons I think that it's looked back at as so flawless is that it was with us for such a short period of time, and it was never given a chance to fail. Would it have failed? Honestly, probably yeah.
But this was the odd case where we didn't get to witness this failure. So it was, or is, hard for us, the consumers, to see how it would have. Sega literally ended its run, leaving us wanting more, which is something you want to do with a TV or film series, end on a high note before things go south and burn out. However, this is something that just doesn't happen in the console space. It seemed as if things were going well, and they were to a degree, but Sega did see the dark times ahead and decided to call it before they got there.
Could they have come out on top had they hung around? As much as I love Sega and the Dreamcast, probably not.
So while it's a tough pill to swallow, it probably was the best move. Even though I don't think I, as an avid Dreamcast fan, will ever be able to totally accept that.
So in the meantime, I will continue to wear my rose-tinted glasses when looking back at the Dreamcast. And remember all the awesome memories it brought me. It still does till this day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Dreamcast, and why it was Sega's most successful failure. I hope you enjoyed this video in my 5-part series about the Dreamcast, and if you're interested, you can check out the whole story here. Visit my other channel, RetroJakeXY, where videos like this will reside moving forward, and if you like what you see, consider subscribing. I want to thank all my Patreons out there. Without you guys' support, videos like this would not be possible. And a special thanks to my top tier members, Marge G and Silverlock. You guys rock. If you want to support the channel, consider hitting the like and subscribe button. If you want to do a bit more, check out the exclusive benefits over on my Patreon. And until next time, you're beautiful, you're awesome, and I love every single one of you. Thanks for watching.